The ground rules are the same as they were yesterday for the panel, 15 minutes each. But what I'm going to do is I'll take just some 5 or 10 minutes to set the stage for the presentations that follow. I'll mention 3 things. One is, since we do have non-economists here, kind of what are some of the distinguishing characteristics, attributes of real estate markets which make them different and unique in a way. I'll set that in the context of developing countries. I'll show a couple of slides in a comparative context with from some data on cities in China, Brazil, and compare it to India, and bring up issues of affordable housing, which then can lead into Venki's presentation. So, what are some of the kind of distinguishing kind of hallmarks of housing and real estate? One, of course, is that, as we all know, there's a limited amount of land. Housing is a lumpy asset. It's an immobile asset. The limited aspect reminds me of one of our professors saying that, in a kind of a tongue-of-cheek way, that all economy ultimately boils down to the economy of time and the economy of land, because these are the 2 ultimate limited resources. The other thing that is specific about housing is that it straddles the family and the economy. It has the whole sector is gigantic. It has many linkages upstream and downstream to various other sectors of the economy, whether it's finance, whether it is white durable goods, whether it's the energy sector. In most parts of the world, the residential sector consumes about 1/4 to 1/3 of the energy that's produced in a country. It's also usually the largest purchase in a lifetime. We all know that. But the other thing that makes it very distinctive, that this is one asset which is both a consumption good and an investment asset. And so because of all this, there are all these social psychology, or as the economist Keynes would have said, there are these animal spirits that drive these markets. There's a lot of speculative fervor, and hence for titling this session, Location, Regulation, and Speculation, because these are the 3 things that kind of describe, in a sense, what goes on in these markets. In the context of emerging economies, the fast-growing ones, we are basically going to talk mostly about Brazil, China, and India, BIC rather than BRIC, keeping Russia out of this whole discussion. There are the demand side issues came up yesterday frequently, the demographic aspect, the urbanization rates, the fact that housing finance is more freely available. There are all these demand side pressures. We have with supply side issues also came up frequently yesterday, the issues of regulation, of land use, of FSI, zoning, etc. And because of all this, by and large, everything else being equal, housing, real estate, land is far more expensive relative to incomes and everything in fast-growing emerging economies. In fact, as we speak, there is this growing debate about whether there's a housing bubble in China and whether it might bring about the next big crash through its linkages to other parts of the world. Because of all this, housing real estate as a share of the economy is about 2 to 3 times larger in these countries than it is in the more developed world. So here is some data. These are kind of average annual growth rate of housing prices over the last 5 years for some selected cities in the 3 countries that I mentioned. And Chennai, the Indian data is from the National Housing Bank's Residex. As you can see, the average growth rate has been pretty significant. If I go back even further, the growth rate is actually even higher for many of these cities, because this period actually includes the global crisis. And in China in particular, they routinely crack the whip in their own peculiar, non-transparent manner. So every now and then the housing market one year goes up grows by 20%, the housing prices grow by 20% one year, go down by 10% the next. So at the bottom, you'll notice that over the same period, a couple of averages for the US and UK, and you can see the difference there relative to these big cities. How unaffordable is housing? The simplest actual measure, there are many measures. So I thought, okay, this is an easy one to kind of look across. How many years does it take to buy kind of a median home in most of these places? And you'll see in China, it is an extraordinarily unaffordable place these days. And there's an increasing attempt to kind of slow down that market through various measures. They're cracking down on second home purchases, on increasing their down payments. They have so many administrative measures at their disposal. India is also very much unaffordable compared to, again, now those are at the bottom, there's the US average and the UK average. Most of the developed world and most of even East Asia, the price to income ratios are somewhere between 4 and 8. And here it is, as you can see, for most of these cities, significantly high. In Brazil, these are the 3 largest cities. There's another way of looking at it, which is to look at the price to rent ratio. This is like those of you who follow stock markets. This is their price earnings ratio. Again, if you look relative to the developed world where it's around 15 to 18, these are significantly higher, and Chennai is the outlier here. I frankly don't know what exactly is going on in Chennai. Maybe somebody can tell us. But if you note in the previous slide also, the growth rate was also the fastest. So price relative to rent is the highest in Chennai. This measure is also used partly to, it reflects many things. One is there some speculative because you can speculate on prices, you cannot speculate on rents. So it's the price, the numerator that goes up dramatically, but it's also a forward-looking thing. If people are expecting faster growth in the future, you will find that. It's also a measure of whether you should buy or rent, because in Chennai, obviously the rental yield is the reverse of that. It's less than 2.5%. So you might just want to plonk that money somewhere and on that rent a house. So all this generally makes housing very unaffordable in all these countries. Now, so the question that arises is, what are some of the things that these countries have done, and what is the share of population that lives in social or public housing in these countries on average? It's very difficult to get city-wise data for any of this, for any of these countries. But, of course, Hong Kong is a city-state, that's different. Singapore is too. But for most of these other places, it's difficult. But you can see there's a very wide range. And by and large, of course, those countries where land is very much a state-owned, state affair are the places where they can afford to have a significant share of population in social public housing. In Singapore, as many of you probably know, the HDB, their housing board, has an interesting strategy in which makes the entry-level people, after a certain minimum occupancy period, they're allowed to sell that, so that appreciation can then be used to get into a higher priced private market. So it's like a stepping stone for upward mobility. So they have given a stake to the residents in social and public housing, which makes it a much more effective strategy. These are some of the recent initiatives that have taken place in these 3 different countries. I just chose one each. Brazil, for those of you who know, they have this Minha Casa, Minha Vida, My House, My Life program recently. I mean, I'm not going to read all that. There are various ways and means that they have targeted it's income oriented. So it's a function of how many times of minimum age do you earn, and those are the people who are eligible for this housing. And most of the subsidy is for extremely highly subsidized mortgage rates. That's the tool that's been primarily used. In India, we have just announced recently the Urban Housing Fund for around 2,000 crore. And China has these, they started in 2008 a project of constructing 36 million affordable housing units. The last time I was there some months ago, we heard that they are actually behind in constructing these, because this talks about 7 million just affordable housing units each year. Their statistics say they build around 10 million a year these days. So out of that 7 million is supposedly social housing. And there are many other problems with that whole program. But so this is basically my last slide. There's an ongoing project at the US Housing Commission on what are some of the lessons that can be learned from all the affordable housing programs around the world. What are some of the common lessons? Now, of course, the first one is that there may not be any lessons at all, because each housing finance system, the housing markets and all are so institution specific, and they are so kind of, the historical and social and cultural context is so distinctive that there may not be any lessons at all. Be that as it may, I have still listed some of the ones that I think are key. I think there are some important ones that I'll mention, and then I'm just going to pass it on to Venki. Location, which we say is the mantra of real estate, is actually even more important in affordable housing. Where do you build it? Part of the problem with the Chinese 36 million housing units is that they're being built in all kinds of, out of the way places. That's one. Wherever any nation has come up with a good program which gives a stake both to the residents as well as to the private developers, is the place which has succeeded the most. So that is another important thing to keep in mind. The third one is that most of the time when people talk about affordable housing, they're talking about home ownership. They're not talking about affordable rental housing. And this is something that I'm not so sure how it will work in the Indian context. Maybe people around this table can tell us. But this is certainly one of the key lessons that comes up practically from everywhere else. That rental is another important component. I think somebody yesterday mentioned the link between housing market and labor market. The fact that you need to have good, fluent geographic mobility of labor. People can go from one city to another where the jobs are, find housing easily and quickly. I mean, the first stepping stone in housing is obviously when you go to a new place is to find rental. So it's important to have a good stock and an efficiently functioning rental market. So this, in a nutshell, is what I wanted to say to lead into Venki's presentation, because probably, given the fact that housing markets are so country-specific, far more than most others, what the need of the hour probably is for some kind of out-of-the-box thinking, some disruptive solutions which can tackle both supply and demand side, which can incentivize developers, which can give a stake to the residents, and thereby, at least in some way, mitigate this problem. Thank you.